All right, guys, welcome back to Establish the Pass podcast presented by Clutch Points. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan, getting ready for our Week 17 picks in the NFL. Dillon, that means the season's over, right? Week 17. That's it.
I'm used to it now.
No.
After last season.
I know, me too. Yeah, it's still a couple more games to go in the regular season, and then we'll be hitting the playoffs. But we will make our picks for Week 17, and then, of course, Dillon, before you know it, playoffs will be here, Super Bowl will be here, teams will have to hire coaches, and that was something you and I were kind of having some fun with, looking at a specific topic that goes beyond Week 17, but already looking ahead to head coach openings, because there's a lot of talk about teams that have already made moves, of course, teams that could make moves. We know there are coaches out there that are going to be very intriguing options, a Sean Payton and such. That will be talked about a lot, but we'll talk about these three teams specifically real quick, because obviously they're all three going to play this week, and we'll talk about their games. But there are three openings now as things stand. Now, again, there could be some others that will open up, and there will be some others that open up. We know how this works in the NFL. There will probably be a surprising one somewhere along the way. Cardinals, kind of an interesting spot, perhaps. Another one that could be leaning towards making a move. But what we know is that the Broncos just fired Nathaniel Hackett, which surprised absolutely no one. The Colts have already fired their coach. Of course, the Panthers have done the same this season. So that leaves those three teams as the definitive list right now. Those three we know have openings, and will have openings heading into the offseason. So, Dillon, we were looking at it and trying to figure out, okay, if you're looking at these three jobs, how would you rank them? We love our rankings here. And I think it's an interesting discussion, and maybe more complicated than you would think, because there's so many different factors you have to look at here. Obviously, the nucleus of the roster. I think division is very important. We always talk about that. And, I mean, the quarterback position, I think, is another one that's very important. And what do you know? I think... Boy, you would have thought this would have been a no-brainer, right? If you compare the three quarterback positions, but right now, not so sure. So if you had to do it right now, who gets the number one spot? Who gets the number two spot? Who gets the number three spot in this?
It's really tough, like you said, and it's not a surprise that all three teams have questions at the quarterback position. Usually, when a team fires a coach, that is the biggest thing. It's a factor, or not figuring out with the quarterback. Looking at what happened last year with Trevor Lawrence. Just overall, I know you're saying, looking at all the openings right now and what other openings that could open up, it's hard to imagine there being as many as last year. I think there were 10 new coaches. I was just going through the list at the start of this, and it's kind of crazy. Maybe it's 9 or 10 if I miscounted, but I don't see that happening. I don't see there being a ton of coaches getting fired after their first year. We kind of knew with Hackett that it was a possibility after the season. Obviously, what happened on Christmas Day kind of expedited that process. And you'd think maybe with Denver's defense, how good they've been, and I know Evero has gotten a lot of praise, their defensive coordinator that was brought in by Hackett, and has done overall a good job there. I don't know if he's going to be a candidate, but I don't know if I would say that Denver is the most attractive job because of the Russell Wilson contract. How there were questions immediately after Hackett was fired whether they would go into the line of thinking of, can we cut Russ? And after with the post-June 1st designation, it would have been a huge cap hit. It's primarily in 2024, not just 2023. But at the same time, at least it would have opened up things. I don't know, that it might limit your field of coaches that are willing to think that they can make it work with Russ. Maybe it can. Maybe I'm sure there's only 32 of these jobs. So I wouldn't say the Broncos, because of the defense and because of still maybe thinking that Russ can figure it out. Maybe they're not the least attractive job. The other, it is interesting. We have two teams here with ownership that's new with the Broncos, obviously, and then also Tepper's not exactly been around too long with Carolina. It's a hard one. I think the Colts you would have thought maybe were the most attractive. The same kind of question of, do they just need a quarterback? But their offensive line has taken a step back this year. Their defense has some talented players, but they didn't look like a team on Monday night against the Chargers that was playing for anything, and they weren't. But they looked a little checked out overall there. I know Nick Foles had his own struggles. I still think maybe I'd say though the Colts. I know Jim Irsay kind of goes up, floats, does his own thing, kind of does whatever he wants, but he's still a reasonable enough guy compared to these ownerships. You just don't know what they're going to be over the course of their tenures with their franchises. So if I had to right now look at the three and to just take a coach that's doesn't have a connection necessarily to Russell Wilson, doesn't have any like built-in connection to any of the other coaches that are already on these staffs. I'd say the Colts maybe are number one. I'm really struggling though between, I think maybe the Panthers would be 3, but at the same time, no, I don't know. I think I might put the Panthers 2. I like what their defense has started to do. Maybe that's a credit to Steve Wilkes and what he's done since taking over for that team. They're still in position to win the division if they win on Sunday against the Bucs. They would have swept the season series and have that tiebreak there. I don't know. It's hard to say Denver's the worst one. I know that this is kind of a thing that I've seen other people talking about too in terms of ranking Denver at the bottom of this list. Other people disagreeing. It's just it really depends on the person you talk to or you're reading about and their opinion, because I don't know. I'd be a little worried if I don't have like any connection to Russell Wilson and I'm coming in there and knowing that if I don't figure it out, you're probably going to get fired. Whereas at least with the Colts and the Panthers, it's a little bit of more open-ended. We talked about, I know beforehand, the Colts didn't realize they've lost enough games. Now they have the number 5 pick. They might be able to get a new quarterback, might be able to take someone high in the draft, might be able to trade up depending on if the Bears are able to get that number 1 seed and then want to trade back from the pick there. So maybe the Colts can find a QB. The Panthers aren't, Panthers have some question marks, but I do think the roster building that they've started to produce, at least on defensively, they've taken some major strides. You see them fighting every week. The offensive line looked really good, obviously on Sunday as they barreled over the lines. Although a lot of teams have done that over the course of the year with the defense there in Detroit. So I guess I'll go Colts as a long-winded way of saying I'll go Colts, Panthers, Broncos. This could backfire terribly on me when the Broncos make the playoffs next year. But man, I don't know. I just really think that contract with Russell, if they were willing to move on, maybe it's one thing. Maybe they will be willing to move on if a new coach comes in and they start to think that maybe Russ is the problem and the GM and some of the people that put the contracts in place. That's the other thing about Denver. They said that the new coach isn't going to have to like answer to the GM and George Patton. I'm like, what type of relationship? There's not a lot of teams that don't have a really like symbiotic relationship between coach and GM. You think of a lot of teams in the NFL that have that connection, and that's how crucial that is. So that's another reason why Denver maybe for me. Whereas I feel like anyone that comes in still with Ballard there in Indianapolis, yes, he hasn't hit on all of his picks, but I still think has a sound process overall. And with the Panthers, I think you start to see that this maybe has a chance to be something you can build from scratch. So I don't know. I'll go with that order. I'm curious to see what you have to think, because it's a tough conversation. I wouldn't say there's a reason that these are openings, right? It's not. It's hard to like pinpoint every time. There's not always like openings like the Vikings last year, where we clearly looked at them as one of the better opportunities. Even the Bucs, they ended up hiring from within. But when Bruce Arians stepped down, like there's not always going to be positions like those that are available.
Well, there are strengths and weaknesses with both, or with all three of these teams in terms of like what do you look at. For the Panthers, the fact that they play in the NFC South is a nice thing, because you could be looking at the Bucs, who are already struggling. They could be without Tom Brady next year, which I think is very possible. Falcons, clearly a rebuild. Saints, clearly a rebuild. Panthers are rebuilding, but like they still have a chance to win the division. Let's not forget that. It's a bad division, but like they're still in the conversation. I don't think their roster. If I had to rank the rosters, I think the Panthers are number 3. Like I think of these 3, like I think the Broncos and Colts have better rosters than the Panthers right now. And if you go to the Colts next, they have the best draft opportunity, right? Because they will likely have the highest pick of this group. So the best chance maybe to turn it around, or maybe even trade up and do something wild is certainly possible. I think the issue though for the Colts is, like you said, it's trying to figure out what you're going to do with the quarterback position. I think that is certainly a problem. Then there's the Broncos, who I've said it before, the offense should not be as bad as it's been. Nope. You got to remember they still have Javonte Williams, who, by the way, the Colts still have Jonathan Taylor. Let's not forget that. Javonte Williams, we thought could be the breakout type guy. He gets injured. That kind of changes things. Obviously, Russell Wilson, disappointing. But like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, good wide receivers. Yeah. Defense is the best of the group. And for that reason, like, I look at it, I feel like the Broncos are like, if you're looking at it from a roster standpoint, I feel like I still like the Broncos roster better than any of these three. But it's just, you're relying, though, on Russell Wilson not being what he's been this season. And I think that's where, like, that's the issue is. Like, the mystery is, was it just that bad with Nathaniel Hackett? And he just, we've seen Russell Wilson play. Like, he's not playing well. And so that is kind of one where it's, I get a little worried about that with him. So I think and they play in the toughest division of the group, let's be honest. The Broncos play in the toughest division with the Chiefs and the Chargers. The Chiefs and Chargers aren't going anywhere. Like, I think that's kind of what you know. Raiders, who knows? But the Chiefs and Chargers, they're not going anywhere. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, your path to being more successful is the toughest in Denver because you're playing in the toughest division. So I think I'd almost agree with you in that I think the Colts may be the best option because they have the best draft spot, which could address the quarterback position, could address something else. Although I still think I like the Broncos roster better. I didn't think I'd be as definitive on putting Carolina third, but I think I look at the roster and I think Carolina's third. So I really think it's just, again, it's a toss up for me with Denver and the Colts, but there's a part of me that wants to lean towards the Broncos, but I am scared of what you're going to get offensively with Russell Wilson moving forward. And you are kind of, I mean, look what you gave up for him. You talked about kind of how the management situation could work there. But I do like the roster quite a bit, and that makes me want to put Denver first, but I think I'm going to put the Colts in that first spot because they play in the AFC South too, and as we've seen, I think the Jags are on the rise. The Texans are not. The Titans feel like they're going in reverse. So I'll go Colts 1, Broncos 2, Panthers 3.
There you go. I can't blame you. The roster is definitely the best, like you said, top to bottom of the whole group. It is just like you said, is it really just the coach? Is it? I mean, you kind of forget early in the season how bad it was with the crowd chanting out the play clock like it's a college basketball like countdown on the opposite side. It's like, so maybe it, but at the same time, Russ still, he could still be able to figure those things out. Still, maybe it is a year to reflect for him and things do improve. It's a weird situation with that contract, having to make it work with him, not being able to have like that flexibility to kind of figure out your own path. But I do understand for sure, because it's not like Carolina's whole roster. They're still in the process. I just do like some of the pieces they've drafted, and I think the culture there could be in a better place. And like you said, the divisions, you have to think about it because the South, right? I think there's no team in either the NFC or AFC South with a plus 500 record at the moment. I think everyone's actually under 500. So not that that's going to necessarily continue. I still think some of these rosters and those divisions are going to rebound. I think the Jaguars are rising for sure, as we'll talk about in the AFC South in particular. And
it's like in the AFC West though, like, right? It's like if Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes are playing, the Chiefs and Chargers, like, they're not like, I don't see the Broncos, no matter who the coach is, eclipsing either one of those teams right now.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe is the issue for putting them at 1, which is why I think I ultimately lean towards the Colts. So I think that's the problem for me. So
makes sense. Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. We'll see how it works out for all these three teams specifically. Like I said, there will be more, and we'll talk more about those once we get into the offseason, of course. But let's jump into our Week 17 picks. As always, we'll go through some of these games a little bit more in depth, our game of the week, our betting locks, upsets, and such. But then we will go into our quick picks and just kind of run through those quickly on all the other games. All right, the game of the week. One choice this week, and I think it's clearly the best one. That's going to be the Bills heading to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. Bills are 1-point favorites in this game. Obviously, a lot in play here for both teams in terms of seeding and such, and trying to figure out exactly where they're going to wind up in this race here in the AFC. But man, this is it's a 1-point spread for a reason, Dylan. You've got two teams that, look, the Bills have won, 6 in a row. Bengals have won. Why am I not have my number here?
It's like 8 or something.
7,
they started
7 or 8.
2.
Yeah. So they've won 7 in a row. Bills have won 6 in a row. So I would say someone has to lose here, but that's not necessarily true. They could go to a tie. But I am going to go with the home team here. I think the Bengals, as we said, they've not lost since that game against the Browns way back when. And I think, Bills on the road here. This is a AFC South, or excuse me, AFC Championship preview type game here. When you look at kind of what these two teams are capable of, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. But I will lean on the home team here and see that the Bengals keep things rolling right along, and what quite possibly could be one of the better games of the season.
Yeah, I'm going to be more excited for this. We barely missed out on this in the AFC title game last year. Not that it was a dud by any means with Chiefs Bengals last year. Two of the quarterbacks that we obviously love watching, two of the best young stars in the entire NFL. And while they're not necessarily, I think with Mahomes and Hurts, even with the games Hurts has missed, still at the top of that MVP race. I don't know, if there's two guys that outside of Mahomes that I enjoy watching more than Burrow and Allen. Obviously, their teams are really solid. We've talked a lot about how the defense for Cincinnati arguably better than last year. On offense, losing La'el Collins, I believe. I didn't see the last update, but losing him, definitely a big hit for an offensive line that was starting to come together for Cincinnati. Buffalo, a team obviously without Von Miller. Every team has their injuries to these key kind of positions, but they've still kind of figured out their pass rush. And Buffalo just finds a way to win. They're just an overwhelmingly deep team. I think the Bengals are going to be a huge challenge for them. So it's a game, like you said, that has such a big impact on the playoff picture. Like I don't think anyone wants to face, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but I don't think anyone wants to face Justin Herbert and the Chargers and how that defense is kind of coming along in that first round. Obviously, you'd like to have a bye, but winning this game for either team probably puts you in the place where you're at least a 2 seed, and you're not going to have to face the Chargers. So there's a lot of incentive there. This lines up. I'd love for this to be the AFC title game, but if the Bengals win, like you mentioned here, then I think the Chiefs would slide into the 1 seed, and these two teams would likely duke it out in the divisional round. Still would be a fun rematch. It has the feel of that late season game last year between the Chiefs and Bengals, where they both faced off. And then we saw them again in the playoffs, and it was both games were classics. Could see that happen again. I'm going to go with Buffalo here. I think I just trust them a bit more, and also some of the kicking issues for Cincinnati we saw with the missed extra points and field goal there, and some things where Burrow turned the ball over a couple times. And I think as good as New England's defense is, I'd put Buffalo still ahead of them in my mind at this point. Or they're probably neck and neck really in the rankings. Yeah, they are 3 and 4 in DVOA. New England just barely ahead. So it's going to be fun, I think, either way. I just think the Bills have more answers ultimately by the end of it. I think they're just an overall deeper team. There's a reason it's a 1-point spread, right? It's going to go either way. It should be just a really exciting game. So I'll pick Buffalo. That way we get one end of the coin each shot here on this one.
Yeah, I'm curious. Our standings. We're actually picking opposite on several games this week. So yep. I don't know if you're still trailing me on these.
I'm definitely trailing, but I think by 2 or 3 games.
Okay, so this could be the separator here this week. You could move into the league depending on if any of my wild picks come to fruition. All right, neither of us are neither going too wild here on this next one because the betting locks of the week, usually it's multiple. This week we both decided, hey, we've got one, and we're going to both go with this one. The 49ers are 9.5-point favorites as we record in Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. Now, why we say, as we record is because, of course, the Raiders have announced that Derek Carr will be benched for the rest of the season, which we know what that means. That means he will not play for the Raiders again. And that means Jarrett Stidham steps in to play a 49ers defense that will be salivating over that possibility, I believe. And, so to me, the Niners are double-digit points better than the Raiders here. So at 9.5, and again, I don't think it'll stay there. I think they take care of business here, so we're both going to lean on the Niners to get a definitive, decisive victory here over the Raiders.
Yeah, I think it moved to 10, so I think we'll still take that at 10.
I'm still fine with
that. Yeah. It's only moved from 9. It was 9 before that news came out. That says a lot of what Vegas thinks, not the Raiders, but the Vegas with setting the lines in terms of what they think of Derek Carr's value in this matchup. Derek's had some good games, but man, he had some plays and some missed opportunities in that game against the Steelers that end up costing them, and it's kind of been the story of the season for a team that's lost a lot of close games. I don't think you can put it all on him, but I do think there is part of it where it's like, how far can this roster go? Maybe a Jets or some other team that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this eventually in terms of where we think if Derek Carr is not going to stay with the Raiders, where he could end up. There's plenty of teams where I think they're better suited to win now than what the Raiders still have on defense. They still have a lot of questions on that side of the ball. They have some really talented playmakers, but their offensive line isn't as far from perfect. They need a guy that could probably, if they really want to get quickly back into being a playoff team like they were a year ago, someone that can work out a structure more than Derek. But yeah, in this matchup, regardless of who was going to play, the Niners are just bulldozing everyone at this moment. Purdy looks just fine. He's fitting right. Speaking of a team that maybe Derek Carr could play well on, would be the Niners. With the playmakers they have, even without Debo, they've just been a force still. Their offensive line is ridiculous. They still have Kyle Shanahan drawing up plays that are getting guys open, and then that defense is just swarming. I mean, it's gotten to a point where they are number one in defensive DVOA. You can't run on them. You can't. They have maybe still not the best secondary in the world, but they are holding up just fine with the pass rush that they have, with Fred Warner patrolling the middle of the field, probably the best coverage linebacker in the NFL at this point. They're just an absolute. They're a problem, I guess is the way to put it. And I think they're going to crush the Raiders, to be honest. I don't think, after the Raiders had something to keep fighting for, they'd won that game against the Patriots. But they go into this, and if they'd won in Pittsburgh, right, they'd be kind of right in that discussion still. I think they wouldn't be too far out of they might have been right there tied with some of those teams just on the fringe of out of the playoffs. But now it's like, it feels like it's all done. Obviously, with them going to Stidham, I wonder how the team responds to that. Maybe they do try, but I don't know if it matters with how good the Niners are at this point.
Yeah, I think the Niners take care of business here in this one. All right, to our upsets of the week. And Dylan, I feel like I've gone to the AFC South a lot this season, specifically a lot recently. I took the Jags to beat the Cowboys. That worked out okay. However, you heard me wrestle with this game right here. Like, this was one that I had a lot of trouble with because I'm thinking, both teams, neither team really has a lot to play for, although one team maybe has more to play for, and that is based on their draft order. The Jags are 4.5-point favorites on the road against the Texans. Texans on a one-game winning streak, as we know, beating the Titans. And still, though, hold the number one spot in the 2023 NFL Draft with a 2-12-1 record. So they are still ahead of the Bears, who are really trying their best here, having lost 8 in a row, to get to that number one spot. But the Texans, like I told you, Dylan, they can really hurt themselves here by winning this game. But the Jags have nothing to play for because no matter what happens here, they are still playing for the AFC South in Week 18 against the Titans. So Doug Peterson said he's going to play his starters, but we've heard that before too. And I don't trust the Jags are going to keep their starters in very long in this game, and that's why I'm going to pick the Texans, even though a lot of Houston fans are going to be rooting maybe against their team because they want Bryce Young. And if they win this game and the Bears lose, which you'll see in a second, we think is a very real possibility, then things become a lot more interesting. So I don't know what you do here, but I think people are going to laugh at me. I think this is one of the most fascinating games of the weekend because I just want to see which one of these teams wants to win more because neither really have anything to play for except for the Texans really need to lose.
Yeah.
But because of what the Jags are going to do personnel-wise, I think the Texans may actually win. So, this is quite a matchup here.
Texans have been playing good football for a little while, and I say good football relative to what they are, which is one of the worst teams in the league. For the talent that they have maximized it, in my opinion, the last few weeks. They've almost beaten Dallas, obviously, too, right? And they beat the Jags earlier this season. They held them to 6 points, one of the weirder kind of results at the time when the Jags were starting to figure things out. I think still, maybe there will be a mandate. I don't know. That's not something they're supposed to do, obviously, for Houston to not win this game because, that is costly in terms of what they would have to potentially trade back up to if they want the number one pick from the Bears. We've seen teams move up one spot. I think of the Mitch Trubisky Niners when the Bears traded up for him. They only traded up one pick and had to give up quite a bit. So it gets dicey at the top there. Whereas the Jags, even if they play the starters for like a half or whatever it is. The other guys still don't have any incentive to stop playing hard. Not that the Texans players themselves do. That's kind of what happens in a lot of these cases. You think of the Jets team that a couple of years ago, how franchise altering it was for that Jets team that was playing really hard in 2020, ends up winning a couple games and gets the number 2 pick instead of the 1, and we see that play out in that Thursday night game right in front of us with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson facing off. It's franchise altering, so I'm sticking with the Jags just because I think they want to keep the positive momentum going. Maybe Doug Peterson thinks there's something to actually having a above 500 record. I don't know. It really shouldn't, in the grand scheme of things, matter if you're 8-9 or 9-8 if you win the division. In either of those cases, you still going to the playoffs. I think, just for no offense to the Titans at all, I enjoyed Mike Vrabel and that team. But I do think watching Lawrence in the playoffs would be a lot of fun. This game doesn't matter, though, for it, but I still think they'll find a way to win against a Houston team that, yes, they've been playing well, and I'm worried that you're right. You're going to nail this in terms of being right on to what's actually going to end up happening. But I'll go with the Jags to find a way to win in a game that's going to be kind of one of the weird, like you said. I don't know if it's the ones I'm most intrigued by, but I'm definitely interested and curious to see how these two teams approach this game.
All right, to Dylan's upset of the week, and the reason I didn't pick this one is because I need one of these teams to win as my Super Bowl pick. That sure is not going to be my Super Bowl pick once the playoffs roll around. The Panthers are at the Bucs. The Bucs are 3-point favorites in this one. The battle for the NFC South continues between teams with losing records. And the Panthers, as I said, are the underdog here. And Dylan, you're going to go with the underdog here is for the Panthers to go on the road to beat the Bucs. That would kind of sum up the Bucs season, I think. It would make a lot of sense. But as I said, I need my Super Bowl pick to make the playoffs to give me something to root for because the Chargers, Dylan, are in. We didn't think they'd be in for a while, but at least the Chargers are in. So at least I've got a chance there, although a very slim chance of getting my Bucs-Chargers Super Bowl matchup that I picked before the season. The Bucs are not going to get to the Super Bowl, but they do need this one to get to the playoffs. So I will go with Tampa Tom here to figure it out. Although, man, the Bucs they're only 3-point favorites at home against the Panthers. I think that's probably the biggest thing here, and I'm going to pick them to win. But you obviously cannot trust the Bucs here in this spot, I think.
Yeah, we saw what they did earlier this season where Carolina, right after the McCaffrey trade, just dominated that matchup against the Bucs. I think we've seen some flashes of Tampa at times. Wasn't pretty, though, against Arizona. That's a bad team right now. And I just think that we see the fight that Carolina's playing with. I think their offensive line is, we're talking about kind of in our conversation earlier, is getting better. I wouldn't say it's good by any means at this point, but I mean, they dominated that matchup. It's going to be a tougher one here against a Tampa defense that, while it's not great or great, it's still probably top 10. I don't think they're the reason this team is playing at a clip like 7 and 8. I picked Carolina. It's more of a feel of like the direction of the two teams. I still think that Tampa's the better football team overall. I don't think their record is overly. I think they are, towards the middle of the pack. So I guess. 7 and 8 record isn't way off of what they should be. They should probably have a couple more wins. I'd say they should be more like an 8-win team, or a 9-win team. And Carolina probably accurate where they are. I don't know. It's just I know the game's in Tampa, and that has to factor in as well. ESPN's Football Power Index has this as a 50.1% for the Panthers, 49.2 for the Bucs, and then a little wiggle room. So they have this as a coin flip. I see it going neither way too, but I'll go with Carolina to win, and then they still have to win the following week. Tampa still can get into the playoffs if they lose this week when the final week in Carolina falls in that season finale. So there's still a possibility for you, Blake, that the Bucs will get in even if I win this pick here. But I'm not. I think it's it's gonna be an interesting game. Tampa's a really hard team to understand because they have the flashes again where they start playing better, and they have the first half against the Bengals, and things do fall apart against a really good Cincinnati team. But that game against Arizona was just bad. It was really hard to stay like completely zoned in on Christmas night to that one. And I just think Carolina's playing a little better football, a little more playing more with something like they don't have anything to lose, I guess. Whereas Tampa, if they don't win this division, it's going to be a pretty big disappointment for that franchise.
Well, I mean, a little sidebar here because I don't know if everyone knows this, but our longtime listeners will know, right, that you and I pretty much predicted Tom Brady to land in Tampa. And, we're kind of having some fun with. We did get that. We said everybody started like, what makes sense? We're like, no, it sounds crazy, but the Bucs are actually the team that gives him the best chance to win. And what do you know? We actually got that right. They wound up winning a Super Bowl when that happened, but. I think now we start to look ahead, though, with Brady. And, again, we'll get back to our picks in a second, but I think this is an interesting discussion that people are already having, and it's because it's Tom Brady. Obviously, he's retired once, came back shortly after, and now I think you're looking ahead for Brady because if he plays again, which at this point, I mean, I think we just have to assume he's going to play forever. Like, there's no doubt. We're going to be having this discussion for the next 20 years. So if we just assume that he's going to continue playing, I mean, like, things are a lot more interesting, right? Because we just talked about the Raiders situation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Josh McDaniels is there. Derek Carr is out of there. Like, I don't think there's any doubt at this point. Sean Payton could come back and coach somewhere, and I think Sean Payton teaming up with Tom Brady would be a fun experiment for a season. I don't know. Are there any obvious, options as of right now? And like we said, a lot of things can change based on coaching moves and such and off season, draft and teams drafting quarterbacks and that kind of stuff. But are there any just glaring obvious spots for him? Because right now, like I said, I think the Raiders would certainly make sense based on the connections there. I do think the intrigue of a Sean Payton, depending on where he goes, there's a lot of things that would make sense there because I think those two teaming up, there would be my guess is there'd be a mutual kind of, confidence in each other to be able to figure it out for one season. Because again, I think if you're adding Brady, you're doing it under a 1-year contract basically at this point, even if it's not, right? Like it's basically for the next season, and beyond that, you have no idea. But I don't know. It's an interesting discussion.
It's a tough one. I don't know if there's a team. I mean, that we had that discussion, I guess, more so after the season. Not that it's too much is going to change over these last 2 weeks. Very different given where Tom was at that time. I do wonder about what teams are going to think about him. I think teams would still take a shot at it, thinking they can catch lightning in a bottle like Tampa did. I don't know if everything this year is on Tom, but he definitely hasn't looked quite as good. I wouldn't say he's playing at that same level, but you would have said the same thing after his last season in 2019 with the Patriots. I'm looking up and down the list of teams, and the Raiders have a good, for all the things that I mentioned with their offensive line, they're still 7th in rush offense DVOA. I think the idea of somewhere where a team can actually run the ball effectively, which Tampa 30th in that category. I think that makes a huge difference for him. I look at teams that aren't sure about their QB positions, that are in the mix still. Like, for example, would the 49ers take a shot on him, or are they're like, oh, look at how good how well we're playing with Brock Purdy. We can win with anyone. I know Kyle Shanahan had some comments before their matchup earlier this season about if he could go back to 2020 and if he would have wanted to try to sign him, and seemed like maybe hinting at that could have been a possibility. That's from Brady's point of view, and this I think was always the team that he probably wanted to play for as a fan growing up, and just given the roster they had, I think if he could have hand chosen his team, maybe that's the one he would have and would still pick moving forward. I don't know if that's going to actually.
I see one, Dylan. I see one that I wasn't thinking about, but now I see one that would make a lot of sense. Now you're gonna have to move some things around a little bit, but
it's in this.
Mike Vrabel's the head coach of the Titans.
Oh my gosh.
They can run the ball.
Yep.
They've got a good defense. Nashville could be kind to Tom. I mean, that's an interesting thought. I don't know if there's anything to it, but that is an interesting. Add that one to the list. All right, let's put that one on our short list to discuss after the season.
Yep.
Because I think there's a lot of things that would make sense there. He's got a confident running game, but I don't know wide receiver wise though if he's quite where he would want to be. That's the problem, right? Because we said the thing that was appealing about Tampa was because of the wide receiver group.
And the offensive
you don't really have that with the Titans. You got that way more so with the Raiders with Devontae Adams. That's the problem with the Titans. But there is a connection there, and it is a team that I think will be in need of a quarterback, even with Ryan Tannehill still there. yeah, that's one to maybe put on the short list.
There's a lot of teams that are in weird places where they don't have their franchise quarterback, but they're probably like fine with them. Like the Giants, for example, a team maybe again without the most not many receiving playmakers. Darius Slayton having a great year, but like in terms of a team that can run the ball still has a good defense. Things are moving positively. Their teams are like already kind of in the mix. I think you look down that next group, like what Tampa was before they got Tom. That's kind of like where I've been trying to look at like what team has not just solid like foundation overall, but like you said, playmakers. I don't think he wants to go back. That's the only issue with like New England. I know that's been a rumored team like for the last few weeks. There's some rumblings of that actually being the place that he would go back to, but I do wonder. Yeah, there's some. You could argue the receiving corps are better. 2019 they were awful for the Patriots in his last year there. You could argue they're better, but I wouldn't say there's like a bunch of superstars there. A lot of teams are able to kind of play too high and let those guys mostly work underneath them. There's not, unless they blow coverages. There's not a lot of big plays that New England passing game has been able to do this year. I don't know what that would be, just a completely blowing up what's going on with Mac, and I just don't see that happening from their end. I don't know for him if that's a nice storyline, but it's like from an actual football point of view, I don't think that they're the best team for him. I really think the Niners, if he could choose where to go, there's not a better situation in football than them. I think the Raiders are interesting because of the playmakers they have, because of their running game, because of the McDaniels connection. I think those are the two right now that I'm like, if he could pick. But it is a weird, like, you wouldn't go to the Lions, right? Like I'm like looking at a team that has a great offensive line and playmakers.
You said something I was going to bring up. Lifestyle is important too. Yep. And at this point, he's going warm weather. I just don't. To me, there's no reason to go back to New England to play with. I don't see the upside there for Tom Brady. Like I feel like you go back, it's maybe the last season of your career. I mean, you're not the Tom Brady of 5 years ago, and I just feel like you're asking for like a bad send off when, in reality, was the send off perfect the first time around? No, but like why should we think it's going to be better this time? Yep. And I'm with you. I think there are two very clear-cut favorites, and I think that would be the Niners or the Raiders. Beyond that, like you said, we could connect some dots with a team like the Titans.
Miami. I mean that was the team he was trying to go to. I know. I feel good about Tua. I wouldn't want to go away from Tua, but if their owner, given what he tried to do with how they lost the draft pick and kind of colluding to try to get him and Sean Payton, would he now that he has a situation where he could actually do it? I don't know. Their owner is kind of the wild card there, but I wouldn't. And talking about lifestyle, it wouldn't be difficult for him to go from Tampa to Miami. So I don't think that would happen. I think you got to trust in Tua. I think that Mac McDaniel is very comfortable with what Tua has been able to do and how they, the last time we talked in terms of where they were after that Charger game, that even though they lost, it seemed like we're figuring out solving some of those questions, and that almost beating the Bills and a really great effort there. So I don't know, but that's one that maybe, and that will probably be floated around, I'm sure.
Niners 1, Raiders 2, Titans distant 3, Patriots distant 4. Well, I may put the Patriots ahead of the Titans. Yeah. Patriots a distant 3, Titans a distant 4. And if you're trying to find a fifth team, like you said, Dolphins, I just don't see it. But I think the only other team, and it's not going to happen, but like if you're saying the scenario, like Washington to me is like the only other team that has a clear, no idea what to do with the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And yet are still a playoff capable team, but like there's nothing about the roster offensively outside of Terry McLaurin that I feel like would be that appealing maybe. So I think it's a two-team. It would be a two-team race. I know we're doing hypotheticals here, and people are like, "Oh,
Tampa's probably still the leader here."
Yeah, right. So that's what I'm saying.
Sitting tight.
Yeah, I mean, returning to Tampa seems like the most likely option, but if he doesn't retire, if he wants to move around, I think San Francisco is the best spot. Las Vegas would be second. And then I think it's maybe throwing teams like the Patriots or Titans just because of the connections with the personnel. And obviously with the Patriots. So there you go. There's a long-winded discussion on Tom Brady. That's listen. The only reason we did it, Dylan, is because we've gotten this right before, and we're trying to get ahead of the curve here. Just trying to, we're trying to go ahead and let you know where he's going to wind up next season. But we still got a lot of football to be played this season, and we'll see if you are right when it comes to the Bucs and the Panthers here in this matchup. All right, we finish up with our quick picks here. We start, speaking of the Titans, Cowboys 11-point favorites in Nashville against the Titans, who just are not playing well right now. They've lost a lot of games in a row here, as we said. This game does not matter for the Titans. They are still going to be playing for a playoff spot in the NFC South title in Week 18, so there's really not a lot of motivation here. Meanwhile, the Cowboys would like to keep winning. So I thought about this one, Dylan, as a betting lock. I think the Cowboys take care of business and just – I think this is a blowout. So I almost wish I would have picked the Cowboys because I think they will take care of business.
Yeah, since they still have a shot, like you're saying, at the division. I don't think it's going to happen, but still, if Hurts is really out for the last 2 weeks, it's a possibility. Otherwise, don't really have a ton to play for themselves, right? They're kind of locked into that number 5 seed, really. But the Titans, man, it takes some effort to lose to the Texans right now, even with Houston playing hard. I just did not. They had chances, and it just was an ugly kind of game. They just weren't able to get anything really going, and then they couldn't get the stop when they needed it late. Whereas I think Dallas is just, I don't think they're going to let the foot off the pedal here. I think they're going to keep trying to build off the momentum. They want to be playing their best football going into whatever playoff game they have once they get to the postseason. So I'll go with Dallas, and I agree. I think they will cover because I think their defense is going to respond after against a non-Jalen Hurts team still giving up a lot of points to Philly. I think we've seen this Dallas defense have those kind of performances and come back and have a great game. And I just don't know receiving wise. You look at A.J. Brown and what Devontae Smith are doing. I don't, as much as I like some of the guys, and obviously if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, I love Robert Woods, but man, it's just not the same thing that you're going to be facing with that Philly offense compared to Tennessee. So I think the Cowboys take care of business.
Cardinals with the Falcons. Falcons 3.5-point favorites in Atlanta. Like I said, I think the Cardinals are. I think they're done. I don't really see. If you had to ask me right now, I think they make a coaching change at the end of the season. And look, they're still in that interesting spot, right? Because as of right now, they'd have the 4th pick because they've lost 5 in a row. They can still move up in the draft order, and they'd like to probably have a higher draft pick. I'm not saying they're going to tank or anything, but Falcons have just kind of always been right there. As we said, a lot of games this season. I think they'll win this one.
Yeah, I'm picking Atlanta. I think they're just a better football team right now. Even I saw that I think Colts can still be able to play and got cleared, but Atlanta hasn't been perfect. But as we've talked about throughout the season, they've shown some fight. They're definitely played better against better opponents for the most part, and that they're taking kind of care of business against these kind of in these games. I just Arizona, and they lose Budda Baker for the year with a pretty brutal injury. I forget exactly what it was, but it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of too many good vibes for Arizona just overall right now. So I'll pick Atlanta. Seems to be a team that can at least win these kind of games and still is playing for something. Still feel like they're building towards let's finish strong and figure out where we want to be looking ahead to 2023.
Bears and the Lions. Lions 6-point favorites in this one. That number may seem high, but as I told you, Dylan, sometimes you forget that the Bears have lost 8 in a row, and they've been right there in some of these. But as we mentioned with the Texans discussion earlier, a Texans win, a Bears loss, and all of a sudden the Bears are sitting in a nice spot, perhaps for that number 1 spot. I'm going to pick them to lose because I think the Lions, certainly as we said, still have something to play for here. Bears do not, so I like the motivation effect here for the Lions.
The Lions play really well at home, too. I think that the factors in a bit here. I think we're leading into we might have the Week 18 Packers-Lions play-in game, essentially, depending on what the results are with the Commanders and Seahawks. I think they're going to win this game. I think it's again, they play better at home, especially on defense. But I think this is a fantasy championship game player's dream with Detroit and Chicago. These defenses both in the bottom 5 in DVOA. There was questions of whether Eberflus was asked, I believe, on Monday or either Monday or Tuesday about whether he'd consider sitting Justin Fields with all the hits and injuries he's kind of had throughout this year and then being out of the playoff race and obviously having a chance at that number 1 pick. And he said, no, we're run or going to keep him out there. Obviously, I think any small ding that he gets, they would potentially pull him out, which factors in a bit here. Lions have a lot more to play for, and even with the positive. Just given how early in the season how Justin looked to now and how good Bears fans feel, I think as we've talked about in this podcast, and it's just something as I talked to friends that are Bears fans, that I agree with in terms of this team. This is exactly what you would kind of wanted in the season: get the best draft picks possible, and have Fields look like he's the guy of the future. It's kind of happened exactly that way. Still have a lot of work to do overall for their team, and I just think the Lions offense is going to put up some big points here and have a nice comeback after what happened in Carolina last week.
Broncos at the Chiefs. Chiefs are 13.5-point favorites in this one. I think you know where I'm headed with this one. Almost made it my betting lock here. Broncos just fired their coach. Offense has not been good. I know the first meeting was a close game, but there's no way I can bank on that happening again. So Chiefs are the pick in this one.
Yeah, the Denver's defensive DVOA is still 7th, but that team looked like they checked out a bit on Christmas against the Rams. Not to take away too much from my favorite team's performance, but it looked like one team had guys that were playing for something. The other team had, even if they were way out of the race, ball teams obviously going into that 4-10 records, and another team that just checked out completely. They have the ranked DVOA-wise worst special teams in the league, one of the worst offenses, and a defense that I don't think is playing up to the level they can be. And meanwhile, we talked about the Chiefs need to win out to have a chance at the 1 seed, essentially. If the Bills only lose one game and they win both, they'll get it. If they lose one, it's unlikely they'll get it, given it'll probably be Cincinnati or the Bills still at that point. So, I think they're going to blow them out. I think they'll probably cover this. Maybe this is one we look back on and be like, man, we should have pick that one instead of if somehow the Niners have play a little down to the competition. I don't know, but I think both teams will probably cover. I think the Chiefs as well here.
I think so. Dolphins at the Patriots. Patriots are 3-point favorites in this one. Obviously, no Tua concussion again, and Teddy Bridgewater steps in, and I think he's capable enough to lead them to a win here. But I think the Patriots' defense is the key in this one, and even if their offense leaves a lot to be desired at times, I think their defense will probably cause a few turnovers, and that may be the difference in why I'm going to pick the Patriots in this one.
Crazy. 4 straight losses for the Dolphins. Looked like a for sure playoff team, and even with how the playoff picture kind of crumpled down, like a lot of teams in the race here started falling off. Look at like the Jets, even the Patriots losing a lot of games lately. Despite that, it's just disappointing because of how fun Miami's been all year, and now with Tua, don't know. If this was in the middle of the season, we probably would see him back. But at this point, with only 2 regular season games left, if they miss the playoffs, and if they lose this game, they're in a really tough spot just overall to get in. Given the tiebreak New England would have, they would have help with Buffalo playing New England next week, but other teams also in that mix, right? It's a crowded race there at the end of the AFC. I'm picking the Patriots too because I think their defense is really good. I think that they came on amazing. The second half against the Bengals was really impressive how they kept them in the game, not giving up a single point, and gave their team every opportunity to win that football game against the Bengals. I think that, and on the flip side, it's not like Miami's defense has been amazing. I know they've had flashes where they're solid, and they do defend the run well. So that is one problem I see where New England's not necessarily like the perfect matchup here in terms of what they want to do on offense. But I'll still pick the Patriots just with 2 out, not knowing what, and the game being it's in New England. Yeah, New England. So I think that factors in a bit here. It'd be a little different story if we're talking about playing in Miami. Although the conditions last week only in the 40s, so it wasn't exactly like you had the normal December heat advantage that Miami usually gets. But yeah.
Some snow outside the stadium, I think, before the game started. That was kind of a wild thing, to say the least. Colts at the Giants. Giants 6-point favorites in this one. Colts, another team that has switched quarterbacks quite a bit this season. And, don't know about the upside heading into a game with the Giants team that certainly, as we said, a lot to play for here for the G-men. So I think they are the choice here against the Colts team that probably more playing for a better draft spot at this point than they are anything else.
Yeah, Giants have a chance to clinch a playoff spot here. Colts looked, at least offensively, checked out. Again, maybe it was Nick Foles, it was a real struggle for them, but the offensive line was giving up a lot of quick pressure to the Chargers throughout that game. A lot of checkdowns, a lot of They couldn't convert on third down. I don't see it necessarily improving immediately against a hungry Giants team that, easily could have won that game. They fought back well. They've done that all season. They're just a tough team that sticks around. Even when you're like, is this team really as good as their record? They still find a way to beat good teams and stay in games with good teams. We had the Commanders beating them in that matchup a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, some funkiness at the end there, but still an impressive performance. Kayvon especially having probably the best game of his rookie year there a couple of weeks ago. And I think, they're at home here just with way more to play for. I think the Giants have to be the pick. It would be real big disappointment if for this team if they can't capitalize on this opportunity to clinch a playoff spot against Indianapolis, because then they'd have to either hope the other teams behind them lose or beat the Eagles, I believe, in their last game. It's not going to be an easy ask there.
Yeah, Giants have about 7 ways to get in this week, and it's very simple. If they win, they're in. But they also 3 different scenarios with a tie, plus they can have the Seahawks and Commanders lose, or Seahawks, Lions, Green Bay lose, or just a different combination with all of those. So they should get in, as you said. It depends on if they win this one. It'll make it very easy on them. Speaking of the Commanders, Browns are at Washington to play the Commanders, who are 2-point favorites at home in D.C. And this one, of course, a new quarterback, Carson Wentz, gets the nod. He's back, and the way Washington can get in is if they win. Plus, they'll need some help with the Seahawks losing, the Lions losing, and the Packers losing or tying. So Washington needs some help here, to say the least. But a win does, give them a step in the right direction. And I think they get it. But as I told you, Dylan, I'm going to pick them to win. But, man, there's no way I have any trust in Carson Wentz right now under center. And I know Taylor Heineke, the offense wasn't wildly efficient by any means. No. But this is a tricky one for me. I almost picked the Browns, and I almost feel like I want to flip it. But I'm not going to. I'll pick the Commanders here. But I don't know. This is a tough one.
I don't feel good about this pick. I don't know. It's a weird thing. If Jacoby Brissett was starting, I would probably pick the Browns. That's not saying that where the Browns might be next year with Deshaun, and I think their value is looking ahead to next season and what they can do to improve there. They don't need to win this year, but their offensive DVOA and passing DVOA has dropped off since Jacoby stopped starting. They were 7th in the league at the time. They've only dropped down to 11th, but they're expected to finish closer to 14th now. It's like they just aren't. It's crazy how much less effective they are, and that allows teams to bundle up on Nick Chubb and stack the box there. I don't know. I'm picking the Commanders. I just think they have still that kind of like they're playing for something. It's a weird game, man. This is a really tough one. I think this is going to come down to the wire either way. I think Washington's defense, though, pretty good. Still borderline top 10 unit and DVOA, despite the last couple of weeks they were in the top 10 prior to that. They defend the run fairly well, a little bit better than the pass. So not necessarily the best matchup for Cleveland in that way. I do wonder about Washington's offense here. Can they hold up against that defensive front for the Browns? Will those guys be attacking as they have the last few weeks? But they just don't defend the run well. So this could be a Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson kind of game for Washington. Not put the game in Carson Wentz's hands, run the ball, do something that the Browns have not done. Attack with the Browns' biggest weakness all season. They've been awful defending the ground attack. So maybe that is the path for Washington to get the win. But again, this is a game that's 52.7% ESPN Football Power Index in Washington. The rest on Cleveland. It is close. It is not. There's a reason the spread is as low as it is. This is probably going to be a game that comes right down to the wire. That you're going to maybe for moments on Sunday, if you're watching Red Zone, forget about it, and the next thing you know, it's going to be like, oh man, there's 3 minutes left. And it's a 2-point game.
Yeah, it's going to be wild, to say the least. All right. So we now get to this next one, the Jets at the Seahawks. Jets are 1.5-point favorites in Seattle. Neither team can do anything about clinching anything this week. I think that's right, isn't it, Dylan? I think that will go into next week in terms of
for these two. Yeah,
I think there will. Again, there's no reason to talk about.
Probably.
Yes, that's true. They can get eliminated, I think, but they can't do anything to clinch a playoff spot this week. I think is the better verbiage there to use, and so, but still a lot to play for both, and I think this is a virtual toss-up, 1.5-point favorite, as we said, for the Jets. I'm going to pick the Seahawks. They're at home here. Jets have kind of been reeling a little bit. I feel like you're going to look back at the Jets and feel like, boy, they had their chances and they had everything sitting right there, and it just slipped through their fingers and just could not get it done. But Mike White's back under center. That gives him a little more confidence probably. But, man, the Jets have still lost 4 in a row, Dylan, and I think this is a tough matchup heading into Seattle to play the Seahawks, who I know, have had their own issues at times, to say the least. But I will go with the home team here, even though, this is a toss-up.
What do you think Patriots fans would think if Tom Brady went to the Jets?
No, listen, I was thinking about that earlier, but I didn't even mention it because I didn't want to sound ridiculous. But he is the missing piece for the Jets right now. They've got the defense. They've got Garrett Wilson. I like the setup for the Jets, but the problem is, as I said, they've somehow now lost 4 in a row when there was a point where we thought that they were a lock for the playoffs, and not the case anymore.
They have the feel. I think it would like you said, it does not sound ridiculous. I don't think it'll happen because it's the Jets, but they have the feel of the good defense, the really good offensive line, and starting to have the playmakers. I don't think they have 2 guys like what Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were, but what Garrett Wilson's been able to do overall, their offense and what we saw earlier in the season before they had their rash of injuries with Breece Hall and other guys, they don't completely just roster-wise look so different than what we saw from that Tampa team. I think Tampa would maybe be what the Jets in like a few years as they keep the build up and maybe get one more receiving weapon and have that defense get a little more well-rounded. I think they still have good things ahead. I think their defense, given where they were last year, they're still going to be fine in the grand scheme of things if they can figure out the QB position. They've looked a lot better with Mike White in there, and he's back, and that's partially why I'm picking them here. I don't, Seattle at times this year was really encouraged, thought they were for sure going to make the playoffs. Things fell off. I still think on, overall their defense has started to kind of slide back. There was a point this year where it was like, wow, they're actually playing way above what we expected. Now they're 26th in DVOA, kind of where we would have thought they would be. The offense has still looked pretty good. I don't think Geno's been the problem. A lot of times he's still playing pretty well. Just have a lot of other pieces that aren't perfect for them. Like you said, for the Jets, it feels like a season with missed opportunity, but at the same time, yes, you would like to make the playoffs, and they still have a shot. If they win this game, they have a decent shot, I think, if they win out, given that they play, let me see, in their last game. They get Miami, yeah. So, I mean, there's probably a scenario, I'd have to look through it, where if they win this game, they might only have to win next week. They might not need a ton of help depending on what happens this week. Seattle, same thing. They're in that boat, but it's a tough one. Given the games in Seattle, I think to go with them, but we just saw Carolina go in there, take care of business, not recently. They just haven't been as consistent as early in the year. Injuries have piled up at times too for Seattle. So I'll go with the Jets in a game that, it feels like it's just survivor mode for both teams. I think the Jets defense and what they've done with Mike White, I think they'll do enough here to make it close at least. Whether it goes their way is going to be, this could have been one of my, I know I put the other upset pick up there with Carolina. This could have, even with the lower spread, arguably might be more surprising, I think, if the Jets win this game. But I still am going to slide with them to keep their season alive. Maybe it's just because I want that Dolphins-Jets game to mean something in week 18.
Yeah, I think we're all rooting for that. That would be a fun one to kind of see how that plays out. All right, the Rams are at the Chargers, Dylan. I guess technically, right? 6.5 point favorites. The Chargers are in this one. Not really a travel game for either team here, but Rams have nothing to play for. I'm going to pick the Chargers in this one. Obviously, they've already locked up their playoff spot. I don't really have a lot to play for either, but the Rams. Look, I know they scored 51 points against the Broncos, but I don't think that was the get back on track game, Dylan. I think the Chargers are probably still the pick here.
Chargers are, easy pick here. The Rams might keep this close, and I understand the spread at 6.5. That sounds about right. I think these are teams that DVOA wise, it's interesting. They're they're back to back. Chargers are 21st, Rams 22nd. I think the Chargers have played better. Their defense has really started to come on lately. I think they're not giving up the huge gashing plays on the ground like they were earlier in the year. Maybe it's a fact of them playing teams that aren't as good on the ground, playing into that, and we'll see how that might actually work in their favor given the opponents they'll likely have in the playoffs, a lot of pass-heavy teams. The Rams, definitely playing for something given how hard they went in that game. Tyler Higbee going off, obviously Jacoby Durant. You look at his advanced stats and things he's done this year, could be another nice find later in the draft for the Rams. But they're still a team that's at 5-10 for a reason. I think that they, again, might keep this one close. Chargers don't have a ton to play for either. Just seeding at this point. I don't know, if they obviously would like to probably be the 5 seed and play the Jags or the Titans rather than any one of the 3 of the Chiefs, Bengals, and I guess they could still technically face the Ravens if the Bengals lose to Baltimore in Week 18. I think regardless of what happens this week, unless the Bengals win and the Ravens lose, but for that reason, I think the Chargers will still have some little bit of something to play for, and they're just the better team in my mind, so I'll pick them to win. But I wouldn't feel so great about the touchdown spread. I think this is like a 4-point game, kind of in that range maybe.
Well, you never feel great about that with the Chargers, I don't think. So, yeah, that's
what's their record against
that's
the
been a
spread
running joke over the years, for sure.
They're 9-5-1 against the spread. Pretty good.
Well, there you go. There you go. Maybe they're not the Chargers anymore. They can't use that anymore on the Chargers. So, all right, the Vikings are at the Packers. Packers 3.5-point favorites in this game. Obviously, for Green Bay, they certainly have something to play for here. Vikings have clinched their playoff spot, as we know. But for the Packers, need to win, and I think they will do just that, putting Aaron Rodgers in the spots. I don't know. As good as the Vikings record is, this is kind of one of those games where you look at everything the Packers have to play for, and I just think they rise to the occasion here and get the win.
I wanted to go with the Vikings so bad, and this is the last game I filled in on the sheet. It's the fact it's in Green Bay. I'm guessing, let's see, the weather's supposed to be 37 degrees, not so bad really, given what it's been.
Warm.
I know the Vikings, they are playing for something. I do think it does, it really for them. I'm still, regardless, if I'm looking way too far ahead, knowing what happens in the NFL playoffs. But if it's Vikings, Niners 2-3, I don't think they have a shot winning in San Francisco. At home, I still would probably pick the Niners, but they really need to win for that reason. They still have a shot at the 1 seed. They would need the Eagles to lose out and win out because they don't have that tiebreaker over them. I don't see that happening. So I think it's. Even though they can't get a bye, I do think there's something to be said for that. But I think the Packers are, I don't think they're that. Still, there's some stuff that I forget who tweeted something along the lines of the Packers being a 7 seed, getting hot at the right time would be more dangerous than them as a 1 seed. I don't buy into that at all. I still think I'd much rather face the Packers than the Cowboys, than the Niners, than the Eagles. But I still think they're playing for something. Rodgers had a few throws against Miami that were vintage, just flick of the wrist kind of deals. The receivers look like they're starting to figure things out. I know that with Watson's injury, wondering how his availability and all that. The defense starting to come together a bit more. But I mean, we've talked about Minnesota all year. They're not a great team for their record. It's not something, this would have been, people were really driving home that point in the first half of the game against the Colts, and then they make that ridiculous comeback. But they're 25th in total DVOA. This is like, I'm guessing and I remember in the middle of the season, they were like, at the time, one of the worst DVOA teams ever for their record. I'm guessing they're going to end up with something like that. Their estimated wins are 6 right now compared to their 12-3 record. I think they're 11-0 in 1-score games. It's just unheard of. Maybe they just have that clutch gene that they for years had lacked when they've lost a lot of those close games. Maybe it's just everything evening out in that way. But I think given it's in Green Bay, given that Rodgers, he has the knee thing that we saw before we started recording, that doesn't look like it's going to have any impact on his availability. It's not that he's been as mobile as he used to be anyway. So I think he's going to be just fine. I think the Packers find a way. They had that one drop. I think it was from Christian Watson, like the first offensive play of the season. That game in week 1 goes completely differently if they score that immediate response touchdown. I don't think it ends up being quite of a runaway win for Minnesota. And I don't know. It's just I think Minnesota's due for one of these games to not just fall their way at the end with some miraculous plays, and I think the fact that it's in Green Bay plays a role in that.
All right, we wrap up with the Steelers at the Ravens. The Ravens 3-point favorites in this one. Obviously, as of now, we don't know if Lamar's going to play. He hasn't been practicing. That's why I would think you would assume he's not. So that makes this a little bit more interesting, of course, in that regard. But yeah, we'll we'll see how it plays out. I don't have a good feel about this one. This is one that I would circle as a pretty unknown. Two rivals here going at it. Lamar out perhaps, and still probably going to lean on the Ravens to get it done. But that's probably more a lack of confidence in the Steelers than it is maybe the Ravens without Lamar.
Yeah, I'm torn. I was torn on this game. At first, I was like, and I did pick the Ravens to win, but at first I was like, wow, the Ravens are just, they're a significantly better team, but they have played some interesting games, right? Like they haven't necessarily dominated for a 10-5 team. They're probably about where they should be. Their defense, I think, as we've talked about since they got Roquan, and just overall has come together really well. I think it's a bad recipe for Pittsburgh's offense, but this is the Mike Tomlin rule. They haven't gone under 500, and they still somehow, despite their struggles all year, are 7-8 with 2 games left. They have a chance to finish over 500 again, and that would involve winning this game, obviously. Maybe if it was in Pittsburgh, I would have considered it more, but I'm picking the Ravens. I think this game, what is the over-under? It is got to be pretty low, 35.
Wow.
I could see this being like a 16-13
23 is what I would set it at. So there you go.
There you go. So it's going to be an interesting one, and a big one for the Ravens. If the Bengals the next night lose, they have a chance to. If they lose, and the Bengals could win the division the next night, so it's still something to play for to make sure Baltimore has a chance at the division in Week 18. So I'll pick the Ravens, but these games, I think this, it's not like the Steelers-Ravens rivalry the last few years has been anything like what it was for kind of the golden age of the Roethlisberger and Flacco and all those Ray Lewis and Ed Reed defenses. But I still think this could be a really intense physical game, but I'll give the Ravens a slight edge.
There you go. There are picks for Week 17 in the NFL, and we will see if Dillon can move ahead in our season-long predictions tally here. But several opportunities to do so. Like I said, we've got some very interesting games. When you get to this point where teams have something to play for, other teams don't, it can make for some very interesting outcomes in some of these games. But we will see how it plays out. But, of course, Dillon got it all covered over at Clutch Points. Let everybody can know where they can find all of that.
You can follow all the Week 17 games in the Clutch Points app. We'll have all of the injury news coverage that we always have, betting predictions, looking at playoff scenarios for every team. We've started a series on dream playoff scenarios in terms of matchups and how the seeding would fit for a lot of teams, and also nightmare scenarios, having to run through maybe the Cowboys and the Eagles and different things depending on where teams land in this grand scheme of things. But we have all that on Clutch Points. Yeah, if you next week I might have to pick all underdogs if you're up by too many games, so I might just have to completely tank my picks for any chance at coming back there. But it's been a fun season. It's been a weird season overall, compared to with the scoring being down and some different things. But I think you're starting to see some teams figure it out, and should be a really fun few weeks at this point. Still a lot to play for a lot of teams, and even if it's not just teams in the playoff race, I think I'm going to be taking a look at this draft order as how it shifts as those games play out, because I think that is one of the more intriguing things to look at the top of this draft. And it's not like last year where we didn't have a quarterback go until after Pickett, until the third round. I think it's going to be a little more intense, and a lot of teams trying to make things happen, and a lot of movement potentially after this year.
Yep, got Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, a lot of interesting options, I think, for a lot of people maybe in that top 10 range. So, we'll see how it plays out in terms of the draft order. But there you go. Check out everything at Clutch Points. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. And thanks, as always, for listening to the podcast. And we'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.